70,000 of the last 100,000 COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. have been among the unvaccinated. Lawsuits over vaccine mandates have reached even the nation's highest court. Late Friday, a U.S. Supreme Court justice denied New York City school teachers' emergency request to block a vaccine mandate.
This is crazy.
The teachers, many who protested all month, were required to get vaccinated by September 30th or be placed on unpaid leave for a year. Meanwhile, California has become the first state to require COVID-19 vaccines for all school children, although the mandate won't take effect until the vaccines receive full federal approval.
These requirements are working across the country. I think the evidence is rather overwhelming.
Children over 12 are already eligible to get the shot. Vaccines for 5 to 11-year-olds could get emergency approval from the Food and Drug Administration by the end of October.
I can't wait. I've been waiting for vaccines for my son. That's the biggest concern we have today, is sending him to school without a vaccine.
Last month, President Joe Biden ordered a vaccine mandate for 17 million healthcare workers in facilities receiving federal aid. Hundreds have quit in protest.
It's a personal choice that I feel in free America, I should have the ability to make the choice if and when I want to take it.
Many health experts are encouraged after Merck's announcement that its experimental COVID-19 antiviral pill cuts deaths and hospitalizations in half.
This is a phenomenal result. I mean, this is a profound game changer to have an oral pill that had this kind of effect.
The potential treatment is being compared to Tamiflu, which is supposed to be taken within 2 days of flu symptoms. Merck says it will seek emergency FDA approval soon. Health Canada is also reviewing the pill. The U.S. government has already agreed to buy 1.7 million doses. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
And welcome to the Thursday, October 7th, 2021 edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. And it's really annoying when I hear a healthcare worker say it's free America and she should have the freedom to take the vaccine or not. You know what? Shut up. The racial awakening after the death of George Floyd didn't prove as much of an arousal for mainstream media after all. But by contrast, George Floyd's murder and the global protest that ensued further espoused the importance of the Black press and again revealed the dire straits of people of color face if there is no Black press of America. A new study released by the City University of New York's Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism found that Black media publishes as much as 6 times more coverage than mainstream outlets on issues of importance to Black communities, including racism, health disparities, and voting access. Released on Wednesday, the report showed that it's called Why Black Media Matters Now, but it found that nearly 1 in 4 articles in Black media mention racism or related issues as compared with less than 1 in 10 in mainstream media. The study concluded that Black media stood out in its focus on a variety of other health issues of particular relevance to Black communities, including maternal health, hypertension, diabetes, HIV/AIDS, and sickle cell disease. They said Black media connects news events across subjects to cover wider issues of injustice, and it provides historical context to present-day challenges and breaking news. Great report from the City University of New York. I'm a product of the City University of New York. Now joining us as we move on is the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin F. Chavez, Jr. Good morning, Dr. Chavez.
Good morning, Stacey Brown. And that report from the City University of New York is very important. It shows that for 194 years, since the Black press was first published in 1827 in New York with Freedom's Journal, we continue to be on the front line of not only reporting the news for Black America and for people of African descent all over the world, but we're an advocate for freedom, justice, and equality. So on behalf of Karen Carter Richards, the chair of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, and all of our 230 African-American owned newspapers and media companies across the country, we're very pleased to have this broadcast every morning. Let it be known.
And Dr. Chavez, in the news this morning, Democrat Senators Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema Manchin of West Virginia and Sinema of Arizona have remained silent during their parties. They did remain silent during their party's lunch this week when colleagues mentioned changing the rules of the filibuster to increase the country's debt ceiling, with President Joe Biden intimating a potential change coming to the archaic and racist Senate rule that requires 60 votes to pass legislation. The two public holdouts may have symbolically been pleading the fifth, but later Manchin opened up his mouth and showed again that he is unwilling to negotiate any deal that includes going around and certainly eliminating the filibuster, which President Biden has responded by saying that the debt crisis that looms, he warned that a meteor is about to hit our economy, and that still hasn't moved the West Virginia senator or the Arizona senator, Dr. Chavez. So again, they have reached, just to be clear, a bipartisan deal just to temporarily keep the debt ceiling, to raise the debt ceiling, but that's only temporary. And we know that the Republicans have said that they're not going to help the Democrats with this. And now you have two Democratic senators that also won't help.
Well, again, whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat is determined not by who you say you are, but how you act. And right now, the senator from West Virginia and the senator from Arizona, they're acting like they're Republicans. So it's going to be up to the people of Arizona and up to the people of West Virginia to determine whether or not they send Manchin and Sinema back to the United States Senate. That's what's going to have to happen. The voters of these states, when politicians or elected officials don't represent the will of their constituents, then the constituents have a right to remove them. And I see that happening on the horizon. This is too much at stake. It's a life and death, not only for the economy of the United States, but a life and death for many of our communities, including the Black community. They're messing around with police brutality legislation. They're messing around with voting rights legislation. They're messing around with climate change and environmental justice legislation. They're messing around with the overall quality of life for our community. And this is no time to be playing with any of those subjects. So I believe that the Democrats are going to continue to push forward. And I think that not only this compromise that they've reached, but I think that ultimately there's going to be a day of reckoning for Senator Manchin. There's going to be a day of reckoning for Senator Sinema.
Yeah, and Dr. Chavez was also in the news this morning. The U.S. Department of Education yesterday announced an overhaul of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Education Department officials said they would implement the overhaul over the next year and make the program live up to its promise. The policy will result in 22,000 borrowers who have consolidated loans, including previously ineligible loans, being immediately eligible for $1.74 billion in forgiveness without the need for further action on their part. Another 27,000 borrowers could potentially qualify for an additional $2.82 billion in forgiveness if they certify additional periods of employment. So in total, the department estimates that over 550,000 borrowers who have previously consolidated will see an increase in qualifying payments, with the average borrower receiving another 2 years of progress towards forgiveness just from the U.S. Department of Education.
Well, again, the Biden-Harris administration, they're keeping their promise, not only to Black America, but to all Americans, that in all of these federal departments where President Biden has appointed new secretaries, and in this case, the Secretary of Education, they're doing what they're supposed to do. They're doing what millions of people elected President Biden, elected Vice President Harris to create change and to repair the damage from the 4 years of the Trump administration. So this is also welcome news this morning.
Yeah, and Dr. Chavez, police are investigating the disappearance of fitness influencer Kashawn Ashley Sims, who goes by the nickname Cookie. Sims is 30 years old. She was last seen in Duarte, California on September 8th. Her family is very concerned about her well-being. Her sister Karen Sims posted on Instagram that asking people to be on the lookout for her. She said that her sister abandoned her home, her dog, and seemingly her cell phone, which is totally unlike her. Another sister, Crystal Sims, posted to Instagram saying that she's trying to make sure that her sister is okay and she will exhaust every option in finding her. To the mainstream media, the cause of missing people of color isn't one they've previously embraced. But since the disappearance and death of Gabby Petito, a young white woman, grabbed headlines and more people realizing that those of color don't get the same headlines, news outlets are now starting to follow the lead of the Black Press of America in spotlighting missing individuals of color. We here at the Black Press and the National Newspaper Publishers Association will, as we always have, continue to shine a light on these cases.
Absolutely. Missing Black girls. And Stacey Brown, you know, we always salute other people, but I want to salute you. For the last several years, we've led the way on not only writing columns, writing news features, but focusing on missing Black girls, missing Black boys, missing Black people. The mainstream media has not done what it's supposed to do. And this is a proud moment for the Black Press of America to see that now the mainstream press will follow the Black press. And that's the way it should be. We should be the leaders, and the mainstream should follow our direction as we speak and publish truth to power.
Yeah, and let it be known, Marcela Howell is the founder and president and CEO of the In Our Voice National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, a national state partnership with 8 Black women's reproductive justice organizations with the goal of lifting up the voices of Black women leaders on issues that impact their lives and the lives of their families. This morning, we say hello to Marcela Howell. Good morning.
Casey, thank you for having me on it. Dr. Chavez, thank you very much for inviting me. I really love your station, and I think that the National Black Press is a critical entity in lifting up the issues that we all care about.
Well, thank you, Sister Howell, for joining the Black Press of America this morning. We want to salute you for the great work that you're doing. And this is an issue. We already know that Black women always are not getting the public policies that serve their needs, and certainly on the issue of productivity, and certainly the way the Supreme Court seems to be going and where these courts are going, define the rights of not only African American women, but all women. Your work is center stage right now, and we want you to know that the Black Press will support you 100%.
Thank you very much. And
Yeah.
you know,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. So I'm sorry, Stacey.
No, I don't mean to step on you, Marcela Howell. You go ahead. We want to hear from you.
Well, I think that one of the things that that we've been working on specifically is we worked with 30 Black women's organizations to develop a Black reproductive justice policy agenda, specifically because not only did we feel that mainstream press was not paying enough attention to our issues, but that members of Congress were not paying attention to our issues. And we wanted to make sure that members of Congress were looking at our issues through a reproductive justice lens, which is a lens essentially that Black women developed. In 1994, 12 Black women were in Chicago at a conference, and they coined the phrase reproductive justice, which basically looks at things through the lens of the lived experiences of Black women. And we know that Black women don't live siloed lives. We're not one issue groups. And so part of this policy agenda is to tell members of Congress that we expect them to act on issues that are most important to us. Black women in 2018 helped to change the House of Representatives. In 2020, we helped to change the White House. And in 2021, in a special election in Georgia, we helped to change the US Senate. So we are very invested in what Congress does and what the White House does. And this is our way of pointing out the issues that are most important to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And along those lines, Ms. Howell, earlier this week, President Biden's administration reversed the Trump administration's gag rule prohibiting health providers who receive funding under Title X to counsel their patients about abortion. You applauded that move, and tell us why it was so important, particularly for women of color.
Well, women of color, a large majority of them get their health care through women's clinics. Before the Affordable Care Act was passed by President Obama and Congress then, most Black women and other women of color would go to these healthcare clinics, not because they could not afford to have their own personal doctors because they didn't have healthcare insurance. And so they were able to get their health care. And people, the opponents of abortion rights and family planning see women's healthcare clinics as just a place to go for abortion. But for women of color, they went to have all kinds of things checked. They would go for their full checkups. They would go for mammogram screenings. They would go to have their blood pressure checked. All of these different healthcare entities that, that keep us working and keep us and our families moving. So to have President Trump at that point basically say that Title X clinics that, do family planning and can help you checking on all kinds of things could no longer talk about the full range of reproductive health services that included abortion, talk about it, refer people to it. In some cases, some clinics actually performed abortion, but they performed them with private money, not with Title X money. And so Trump basically said, well, we're not going to allow you to even stay in the Title X system, which meant that shut down a lot of access for women of color. And so to have President Biden, which is, fulfill again another one of the promises that he promised, especially to Black women, is something to applaud. And so we felt that putting out statements and talking to our constituency about what he had done in terms of eliminating this gag rule was really, really important.
Yeah, and we see it come across our screen. To learn more about the Black Reproductive Justice Policy Agenda, visit blackrj.org/Black RJ Policy, and you will learn a whole lot there. Also, Marcela, how just yesterday a federal judge granted the Justice Department a temporary injunction late yesterday, as I said, blocking the enforcement of Texas's strict abortion law. The courts will continue to change. It seems, and it seems that they're going back and forth in Texas. I know that your organization and others have been closely monitoring and even putting pressure on officials in Texas. What's going on in Texas?
Well, Texas is one of those states that always does really restrictive laws, and then they get overturned by the Supreme Court. So what we saw this time was a law that essentially said no one could get an abortion after 6 weeks. Most people don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. And so what that means is that you can't, if you find out that you're pregnant and you choose to get an abortion, you can't in Texas. And so what the law has meant is that people have had to go to other states. And we thought, like the Supreme Court has done in the past, that the Supreme Court would indeed place an emergency injunction on the law taking effect, because it is an unconstitutional law under the 1973 Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade and subsequent decisions in a number of cases that have looked at abortion rights. And they didn't do it. Instead, they decided, without any kind of knowledge of the public, without really having it debated in any kind of way, they simply decided to let the law take place. And a number of us met with the White House and said, what can you do? And what we saw was the Department of Justice sued the state And the difference with this law, the thing that is so insidious about this law, is it puts the right of enforcing the law in the hands of individual citizens. And we've seen that. We've seen it through, Jim Crow, slavery, Jim Crow, civil rights. We've seen what happens when you tell people that they get to enforce the law. What happens is, the violence that we constantly seen in the past, and what we expect if this law is allowed to stay in effect, we expect this to happen again. Citizens should not be enforcing the laws of the state. That is what the state is for. And what this does is it says essentially that anyone who helps a person get an abortion, has a discussion with them. It could be a family member. It can be their minister. Anyone, any citizen then turn and sue those people in civil court. And that's an outrageous thing to say. It's an outrageous law. And, Texas legislature and the governor there, Governor Abbott, did it on purpose because it makes it harder to stop the law from being in effect. And that's essentially what it did.
Dr. Chavez?
Yes, Sister Howell, thank you so much for helping inform us and to raise our level of not just awareness, but consciousness about what needs to be done. I really like that theme that you've put out, reproductive justice movement. And like the environmental justice movement, like the climate justice movement, I want all of our brothers and sisters who are listening to know that we have to now also be advocates of the reproductive justice movement.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Chavez.
And Marcela, I know that, of course, as you and Dr. Chavez just mentioned, reproductive justice, that's the theme here. That's what you do. But you also, it's a little bit more than that, right? It's about Black women health overall, the well-being of Black women overall. And I say that to say this: I just received a text from the Emmy award-winning producer of the Chavez Chronicles, Clara Wilkinson, which alerted us to something else. She says that based on a new report, at least 4 Black women and girls were murdered per day last year in the U.S. So you had the pandemic to deal with. You had the Black Lives Movement because of the murder of George Floyd, and now you see the what can get lost here, the assault, the continued assault on Black women. I'm sure that that's something that you guys have been tackling as well.
Yeah, the reproductive justice movement is an intersectional movement. It looks at all the kinds of issues that impact Black women's lives. And unlike reproductive health and reproductive rights, it is not a movement that is centered around abortion rights. It is a movement that is centered around human rights. Yes. And so we look at, and also around Black feminist thought. So it is that combined thing. It looks at the right that we have to make decisions about our own lives and what that means. So we look at housing issues, we look at issues of clean water, we look at issues around healthcare, around quality food, and the fact that so many of our Black communities do not have good quality food because of the redlining of grocery store chains. All of those kind of things come into reproductive justice. And the agenda, the policy agenda that I mentioned, goes into all of those things, and it looks at these issues through a reproductive justice lens, which means we're looking at it through the eyes of Black women and their families.
And it's really a long, hard fight, hasn't it? Describe what some of the challenges you faced as you've taken this movement forward.
Well, there's a number of challenges. First, we always have to contend with what has been what is defined as the women's movement, but has actually been the white women's movement, which focus almost primarily on abortion rights, and family planning. And when these 12 Black women met in 1994, keep in mind, this was coined in 1994, it was to really look at those kinds of movements through the eyes of Black women and say, this does not reflect our lived experiences. It doesn't even come close. And
Right.
so the phrase really then took off among women of color. And it really has been a fight to make sure that women of color get the justice that we deserve, get the recognition that we deserve. I mean, the big mission of our organization, the National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, is to lift up the voices of Black women leaders on policy issues that impact our lives and the lives of our children and our families and our communities. And so it is really important for us to make sure that people understand that when we talk about reproductive justice, we are talking about a wide variety of issues. And like in our policy agenda, we have 25 different issues that we talk about. And they range anywhere from Black maternal health to housing justice. And one of the issues that you mentioned earlier is violence against women, not only state violence in terms of over policing, but also private violence, personal, intimate violence against Black women. And so we range a large range of issues, and we are looking to basically make reproductive justice, the human right to determine our own lives, and a reality. It's a vision right now, but we want to make it a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And for folks who may not know, Marcela Howell has spent over 40 years as an advocate, and she's also trained I'm told over 1,000 young activists in policy advocacy as media spokespeople. You also authored Walking My Shoes, a Black activist guide to surviving the women's movement. Talk about that, if you will, just a little bit.
Well, from early in my adulthood, I worked very heavily in the women's rights movement. And I constantly found myself butting heads with white women who thought they knew what was best for me. And so what we had seen at the time, I decided to write this book, and it's just a series of essays about my experience in the white women's movement. And I decided to write it because I was hearing from young Black women who were saying, I went to work for this organization because I thought, it was really going to be great and it was going to work on all these different issues that mattered to me. And I found that, one, I was the only Black person there, or I was only one of a couple of Black women. And we were always being questioned about how we thought and what we thought about things, and whether or not we had backup when we would assert something that we knew was true from our lived experiences. And so that's what the book was about. I wrote it quite some time ago. We have a program at our organization called the Next Generation Leadership Institute, which works with young Black activists on HBCU campuses. And we have seen, and it's a paid fellowship, 2-year fellowship, that we pay them to work with us. We train them in a large number of different issues, organizing and reproductive justice. We support them in the work they're doing on their campus and their organizing. And so we're thinking, I'm thinking seriously about, updating the book because of the experiences that we've had with these young Black women who struggle on their campuses as well, to make sure that their voices are heard.
Yeah, and speaking of producers and great producers, ours, Norman Rich says, he's asking, we are likely to witness significant changes in the court over the next 10 years, as many of the justices are at or beyond retirement age. How do you think the changes in the court will impact reproductive justice, centric issues and policies?
Well, the reality is changes at the Supreme Court level happen at the congressional White House level. I mean, and that's the key. What we saw at one point when Justice Scalia died, we saw basically that the Senate was blocking President Obama from naming a replacement. And they did that simply because they did not want him to basically tip the court. Had he been able to name a replacement, the court would have been more evenly divided. And in terms of how they view the issues. And, people say the Supreme Court is not supposed to be political. Well, what we saw by, the Senate blocking his ability to appoint someone, we saw the politics at play. We saw the politics at play in the naming of, justices under President Trump. And so now what we've got is this really conservative majority that 3 of whom came in saying what they wanted to do was overturn not just Roe v. Wade, but they wanted to go after LGBTQ people. They wanted to go after civil rights. They've already gutted voting rights, the Voting Rights Act, and we're now having to try and get the protections in the Voting Rights Act back in place under the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So there are all these different things that the Supreme Court really does have authority over, and can change how the world is viewed and how our lives are take place and everything. So it is important for people to understand that when they're voting for a president, that they are voting for the Supreme Court as well, because that president will have the right to actually appoint someone, and in voting for the Senate, because the Senate gets to confirm or not confirm a justice.
Dr. Chavez, your closing thoughts with Marcela Howell in our own voice, the National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda.
Well, again, we appreciate the leadership of our sister Marcela Howell and all of the colleagues that she's established across the United States on the issue of reproductive justice. I would just like to say that the United Nations, Sister Howell and Brother Stacy, have determined that the most fundamental human right is the right to self-determination. Black women have a human right, to determine their destiny, to determine their future, to determine their quality of health. And a lot of times, extreme right-wing, extreme white supremacist forces try to redefine the narrative. And that's why since 1827, we've been pleading our own cause in the Black press of America. And certainly, I'm glad you mentioned the intersectionality of reproductive justice with all the other justice issues that we face. So proud that the Black women are taking the lead, not only in politics, not only in environment, not only in economics, but also in reproductive justice.
Thank you, Dr. Chavez.
Well, thank you, Marcela Howell, the founder of the Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda in our own voice, the National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. We really appreciate you being here. And don't forget to check out the Black Press of America and the National Newspaper Publishers Association on TikTok at NNPA Black Press. And let it be known, remember this, in the words of Shirley Chisholm, defeat should not be the source of discouragement, but a stimulus to keep plotting. We will see you tomorrow.